Have you ever wondered why, no matter how much progress you make, there's still a part of you that feels hollow? You succeed, you improve, you keep moving forward, but something inside you is still holding its breath, as if a part of you is waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for someone to finally see through the mask, waiting for a moment when you'll finally feel safe. We don't talk about it much. The ache behind the ambition, the fear beneath the perfectionism, the truth behind the endless striving. Because we've been taught that healing is linear, that growth means never doubting again, that once you become enlightened, you never get triggered, never feel lost, never break down in the middle of the night for reasons you can't explain. But that's not real. The truth is, healing is brutal. Growth is chaotic. Awakening is disorienting. And most of what we call progress is just learning how to carry our pain more quietly. But what if it didn't have to be quiet? What if the parts of you you've been taught to silence were never meant to be hidden? What if the anxiety that grips your chest wasn't a malfunction, but a message? What if the shame you carry isn't yours to begin with, but a story you inherited from people who never learned how to love themselves? You see, most of us were raised in emotional scarcity. We were taught that love has to be earned, that success makes you worthy, that being sensitive is a liability, that emotions should be managed, not explored, that asking for help is weakness, that you have to be useful to be valued. And so we adapted through showing up again and again and again, even when it's messy, because this is the work that changes everything. Not because it makes life easier, but because it makes you real enough to stop pretending, real enough to feel pain without becoming it, real enough to hold contradictions inside you and still remain whole. This is not self-help. This is self-return. A return to the you who never needed fixing. A return to the you who was always enough. A return to the you who can stand in the fire and not flinch. Because the fire no longer threatens you. It refines you. You don't walk around it. You walk through it. And on the other side, you don't emerge as someone tougher. You emerge as someone truer. And this truth, it doesn't roar, it doesn't boast, it doesn't beg to be seen, it just is. It lives in your posture, in your eyes, in the stillness of your presence. People feel it before you speak. They sense the difference, the groundedness, the solidity. Not because you've memorized some script, but because you finally stopped lying to yourself. And in that truth, there is space. Space to breathe, space to grieve, space to begin again. That's what most people don't understand about awakening. It's not the end of your suffering. It's the beginning of your capacity to be with it. You stop trying to be above it, beyond it, immune to it. And you start learning how to walk with it, how to let pain sit beside you without taking the wheel, how to hold space for your sadness without being swallowed, how to hold space for your anger without becoming destructive, how to hold space for your shame without letting it run your life. That's integration. That's what Jung meant when he said that wholeness doesn't come from perfection, but from embracing your contradictions. You are not here to become flawless. You are here to become fully human. And being human is messy. It's paradoxical. It's raw. It's inconvenient. But it's also holy. Because the deeper you go into your own darkness, the more you see the light that never left you. Not the light of fantasy or escape, but the light of presence. The light of the part of you that has always witnessed and never judged. That presence is the healer, not your cleverness, not your control, not your coping mechanisms, just your capacity to be with what is. That's the invitation, not to fix yourself, but to feel yourself. To stop treating your emotions like problems to be solved, to stop treating your triggers like signs of failure, to stop treating your wounds like shameful secrets. What if none of it was a mistake? What if your anxiety was your nervous system asking for attention? What if your depression was the soul's protest against a life that betrays its essence? What if your anger was sacred, a boundary long crossed finally demanding respect? This isn't just psychology. This is soul work. This is you shedding every mask you were taught to wear until all that's left is truth. And in that naked truth, you will find something you've been chasing for years: peace. Not the peace of quiet surroundings, but the peace of inner silence. Not the peace of having no problems, but the peace of not being at war with yourself. That's what makes you unshakable. Not avoidance, not perfection, not dominance, but inner congruence. When the voices inside you stop fighting, when the masks fall away, when the child within you feels safe to speak, that's when everything changes. Not on the outside, but on the inside. And from that center, you begin to live differently. You stop chasing love and start being love. You stop seeking validation and start embodying truth. You stop reacting and start responding. Because you're no longer trying to protect a false identity. You're simply living from the truth of who you are. And that truth is magnetic. It draws in people who resonate with your frequency. It repels the ones who only wanted the version of you that played small. And that's okay, because you're no longer trying to be liked. You're trying to be free. And freedom, my friend, will cost you everything that was never real. You'll feel the cost. Make no mistake, freedom has a price. Not everyone talks about that. They tell you to be yourself, but they don't mention the grief that comes with it, the unraveling, the loneliness, the quiet ache of losing people who once loved the mask, and yet you wouldn't go back. You couldn't, because once you've tasted truth, even if it's bitter, you lose your appetite for lies. The old comforts stop comforting, the old illusions start to itch, and you find yourself craving something more real, more alive, even if it comes with uncertainty, even if it breaks you open, because being broken open is how the light gets in. That's the irony. What you feared would destroy you is what sets you free. Not because the pain disappears, but because you stop resisting it. You look it in the eyes, you sit with it, you listen. And in that listening, something beautiful happens. The pain becomes a teacher, a guide, a mirror. It shows you the parts of yourself still longing to be held. And that's when healing stops being a destination and starts being a relationship with your own soul, with the truth of your experience, with the sacred mess of being human. This is the work no one can do for you. No therapist, no guru, no book, not even this video, because this path doesn't live in someone else's words. It lives in your willingness to feel it all, the grief, the rage, the regret, the longing, the beauty. It's all part of your becoming. The truth is, you were never broken. You were buried beneath the weight of other people's expectations, buried beneath trauma, shame, and silence, buried beneath survival strategies that once saved you, but now only suffocate. And your job, your sacred task, is not to become something new. It's to remember, to uncover what was always there. That's what makes this work so powerful, so terrifying, so beautiful. It's not self-improvement, it's self-reclamation. And as you reclaim these forgotten parts, you begin to notice the shift. It's subtle at first. You pause before reacting. You speak from your truth, not your fear. You stop chasing relationships that require you to abandon yourself. You start honoring your boundaries, not out of anger, but out of reverence. And slowly, a new life begins to take form. Not one free of pain, but one grounded in presence. Not one void of chaos, but one rooted in clarity. Because clarity changes everything. When you know who you are, you stop negotiating with those who want you to forget. When you're rooted in truth, you stop bending to please the crowd. You become dangerous to the systems that depend on your self-doubt. And you become a sanctuary for yourself and for others. Because when someone sees you living from that place, fully human, fully honest, fully awake, they remember something inside themselves. You become a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reflects what's real. And that's what the world needs now more than ever. Not more noise, not more masks, not more hustle for worthiness, but humans who are whole. Humans who are willing to feel, willing to stand in their truth, willing to lose everything false for the sake of what's real. That's the revolution. Not out there, in here. And here's the twist most people never see coming. The more whole you become, the less you need to prove anything. You stop performing. You stop striving to be understood. You stop trying to impress people who were never really listening, because now you listen to yourself. And in that listening, you uncover a power you didn't know you had. The power to disappoint others and survive. The power to be misunderstood and stay centered. The power to stand in the fire of rejection and not abandon yourself to escape the heat. That's where the unshakable self is born. Not in the comfort of approval, but in the furnace of authenticity. You realize peace isn't found in being liked. It's found in being known. especially by the one person who's been with you through it all, you. And when you know yourself truly, deeply, fiercely, you become less reactive to the world. Not because you're numb, but because you're clear. You stop giving your power away to every trigger, every criticism, every fleeting judgment. You stop asking the world to give you what you can now give yourself. Safety, belonging, worth. You carry it with you, everywhere, because you've earned it, not through perfection, but through presence. Not by becoming someone new, but by welcoming who you've always been. That's what Jung meant when he said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And it is a privilege, because most people will never go there. They'll keep chasing shadows, keep polishing masks, keep hoping that if they just achieve enough, smile enough, fix themselves enough, they'll finally feel okay. But okay was never the point. Wholeness was. And wholeness isn't sterile. It's not sanitized or pain-free. It's wild, it's tender, it's fierce and soft and breathtakingly real. It's the moment you finally stop performing and start being. Being confused, being scared, being in love with life again, being honest when it's uncomfortable, being present when it's painful, being yourself when it costs you something. That's the final transformation, not becoming untouchable, but becoming deeply touchable without falling apart. Because you've built something stronger than armor. You've built a home inside your body, inside your soul, inside your truth. And when life tries to shake you again, and it will, you don't collapse. You expand, you breathe, you feel, you respond from your center. And in that moment you realize you're no longer surviving, you're living. And that's when you understand something no book, no guru, no philosophy class could ever truly teach you. That real growth isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It's in the pause before you react. It's in the breath you take before speaking an old familiar lie. It's in the moment you choose honesty over harmony, truth over peacekeeping, self-respect over pleasing. You start to feel it in your body, how certain people drain you, how certain spaces contract you, how certain roles no longer fit. You stop overriding those signals. You stop betraying your gut for the sake of fitting in, because fitting in never gave you what you hoped it would. It only taught you how to disappear more efficiently. And now, you're done disappearing. You're done playing roles that shrink you. Done silencing the parts of you that don't fit the narrative. Done packaging your truth in a way that's palatable to others. You're not here to be digestible. You're here to be real. And realness is disruptive. It challenges expectations. It rattles comfort zones. It disappoints people who only loved your performance. But that's not your burden to carry. Your only responsibility is to stay true, to let the truth cost what it must, to let the old fall away, to let the masks rot in the corner while you rise barefaced into your life. Because now you understand nothing was ever worth losing yourself for. No relationship, no job, no ideology, no dream that required self-abandonment as the entry fee. You're done paying that price. You've grieved enough, lost enough, doubted enough. And now your truth has become non-negotiable. Not because you're rigid, but because you're rooted. Rooted in clarity, rooted in presence. Rooted in the sacred knowing that your wholeness is no longer up for discussion. And in that root, something sacred blooms. A love that's not needy. A love that doesn't beg or chase or bend itself into pretzels just to be chosen. Because now you have chosen yourself. Fully, unequivocally, unapologetically. And when that happens, everything changes. Not because the world shifts, but because your relationship to it does. What once felt like rejection now feels like redirection. What once felt like abandonment now feels like liberation. What once felt like failure now feels like freedom. You no longer see pain as punishment. You see it as part of the unfolding. Every wound, every ending, every lonely night, it all shaped you. It didn't ruin you, it revealed you. And what it revealed is unstoppable. Because when you stop running from yourself, you realize there was never anything wrong with you to begin with. It wasn't your sensitivity that made life hard. It was living in a world that taught you to mute it. It wasn't your intensity that pushed people away. It was their discomfort with depth. It wasn't your emotions that were too much. It was the spaces that couldn't hold them. You were never too much. You were simply too real for places built on performance. And now you no longer apologize for your depth. You no longer dilute your truth to be digestible. You no longer amputate your soul just to fit into small spaces, because you finally learned how to belong to yourself. And that changes everything. You don't chase closure anymore, you give it to yourself. You don't need permission to rest, you honor your own exhaustion. You don't wait for someone to understand you, you understand yourself. This is what real power feels like. Not dominance, not control, not egoic certainty, but the quiet, grounded knowing that you are enough, even when you're a mess, even when you're unsure, even when you're healing out loud. That's the power of integration. You carry your pain without identifying with it. You face your shadows without becoming them. You feel fear and move anyway. Because now your identity isn't built on how others see you. It's built on what you see when you close your eyes at night. And that vision, that inner mirror, it no longer shows a fractured image. It shows wholeness, not perfection, not performance, but presence. Presence that doesn't waver with external noise. Presence that doesn't vanish when others misunderstand you. Presence that stays, even in the silence, especially in the silence. Because silence, you've come to realize, isn't emptiness. It's where the soul speaks loudest. And in that silence, you hear it clearly now. You're not lost. You're just coming home. Coming home isn't a destination. It's a return. A return to the parts of yourself you left behind to survive. The child who used to cry freely before being told it was too much. The teenager who dreamed wildly before being told to be realistic. The soul that once spoke clearly before the noise of the world drowned it out. Coming home is remembering who you were before the world convinced you to forget. It's peeling back the layers of protection, one belief at a time. The belief that you had to earn love. The belief that rest made you lazy. The belief that silence meant failure. The belief that to be safe, you had to be small. But you're not here to play small anymore. You're here to expand. And expansion doesn't always look glamorous. Sometimes it looks like crying on the floor, releasing grief that's lived in your bones for years. Sometimes it looks like setting boundaries with the people who taught you to abandon yourself. Sometimes it looks like saying, I don't know who I am anymore, and realizing that's the first honest sentence you've spoken in months. That's the doorway. Not knowing, not pretending, not performing, just truth. And from that truth, a different kind of strength emerges. Not the strength to keep it all together, but the strength to let it fall apart. Because breakdown isn't the opposite of breakthrough, it's the prelude. Like the forest fire that clears the dead wood, so new life can emerge. Like the cocoon that looks like death from the outside, but is becoming a butterfly within. Your pain is not proof you're broken. It's proof you're still alive, still becoming, still unfolding, still finding your way back to the self that never left. You just stopped listening. But now you're listening again. Now you hear her voice. Now you feel his heartbeat. Now you remember. And in that remembering, you reclaim your life. Not the life you were handed, the life you choose. The life you choose doesn't come from a checklist. It doesn't look like someone else's highlight reel. It doesn't follow the rules you were taught to obey. It follows your soul's signature. That quiet pulse beneath your conditioning. That whisper that says, this isn't who I really am. That ache that reminds you, you were made for something deeper. You don't get there by adding more. You get there by unlearning. Unlearning the need to impress. Unlearning the habit of betrayal, of abandoning your needs to keep the peace. Unlearning the idea that success means being unbothered, unfeeling, untouchable. Because real success, it's presence, it's aliveness, it's waking up in your own skin and finally feeling like it fits. You don't have to be famous for that. You don't have to be rich, adored, or admired. You just have to belong to yourself. That's the revolution. Not external domination, but internal reclamation. You start honoring your own yes and your own no. You stop explaining your intuition. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. And suddenly the world starts shifting. Not because it changed, but because you did. You're no longer living for approval. You're living from alignment. And in that alignment, something sacred awakens. Peace, not from avoiding conflict, but from being unwilling to abandon yourself to avoid it. Love, not as a performance, but as your natural state. Joy, not as a destination, but as a byproduct of truth. This is where everything begins to feel lighter. Not because life is easier, but because you've stopped carrying what was never yours. The guilt, the shame, the expectations. You finally set them down. And what remains? Only what's real. And what's real doesn't need to be earned. It doesn't require performance or perfection. It just is. Your worth is not up for debate. Your voice is not a disruption. Your truth is not too much. You've spent so long twisting yourself into shapes to fit inside rooms that were never built for you. But now you build your own room, brick by brick, truth by truth. You build it with boundaries, with silence, with sacred no's. And slowly, your life begins to reflect your inner world, not your trauma, not your fear, not your programming, but your essence. You stop looking for mirrors in people who only reflect your wounds. You start surrounding yourself with those who see your wholeness, even when you forget it. And in that space, something wild happens. You soften, not in weakness, but in wisdom. You stop bracing for attack. You stop shrinking to be safe. You stop hustling for love. Because now you remember. You remember who you were before you were told who to be. You remember that strength was never about hardness, but about truth. And you remember that you were never too sensitive. You were just surrounded by people disconnected to meet your depth. But now you meet yourself fully, finally, and you realize this is what you were looking for all along. Not answers, not certainty, not perfection. Just this, the quiet power of being fully here, breathing, feeling, choosing, alive. Alive, not in the way the world defines it, not busy, not consumed, not constantly performing, but present. Present enough to feel the wind move through the trees and know it's speaking to something ancient in you. Present enough to sit in silence and not rush to fill it. Present enough to hear your own soul whisper, I'm still here. That's the quiet revolution. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. Because when you're rooted, when you're real, your presence speaks louder than your words ever could. You become someone who doesn't just talk about healing. You embody it. You become calm in the storm. You become the permission others have been waiting for. You become the mirror that reflects wholeness, not just wounds. And that's not just for you. It ripples. Your healing becomes a blessing for everyone you meet, not because you're trying to save them, but because you've saved yourself. You show others what's possible, not by preaching, but by being. By walking into a room and radiating the kind of energy that says, I've made peace with my shadow. I'm no longer hiding. You don't have to either. That's what makes you powerful. Not dominance, not invulnerability, but authenticity. The kind that says, I've been broken, I've been lost, and still I choose to love. Still I choose to rise. And that choice to rise again and again, even when the world gives you every reason not to, that's what makes you unshakable. Not because you stopped hurting, not because you figured it all out, but because you stopped abandoning yourself when it hurt the most. Because now you see, your pain was never the enemy. It was an invitation, the initiation, the doorway back to your soul. And every time you walk through it, every time you meet your fear instead of running from it, every time you let your tears fall without shame, every time you refuse to betray your truth just to be accepted, you reclaim a piece of yourself, piece by piece, breath by breath, until one day, you look in the mirror and you recognize yourself again. Not the version others wanted you to be, not the version you pretended to be just to survive, but you, whole, unmasked, free. This is the work of a lifetime. Not to become someone else, but to come home to who you've always been. You do not need to become a better person. You just need to become whole. And here is the secret no one told you. The more you run from pain, the more it chases you. The more you try not to be affected, the more fragile you become. But when you face your own wounds, when you accept who you are with all that is beautiful and ugly, noble and shameful, nothing outside has the power to dismantle you. However, this path requires courage. Courage to look within, courage to abandon the masks, courage to feel. Because it is precisely in pain that the key to transformation is hidden. And that is what we'll discover in the next part. How suffering, far from being the enemy, can become the gateway to your true strength. If this resonated with you, leave a comment. I choose to face myself. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let's begin a movement, not of people pretending to be strong, but of those brave enough to be real. And don't stop here. The next video is coming. This journey is only beginning. Real transformation begins when you don't stop after the first step. See you in the next one.